Well, as you know, the show is is the work of our guest artist, Stephanie Syjuco. She was in 2023. She was invited by the Lopez Museum and Library to explore their archives, and she chose in particular to focus on the cabinets and photographs from the Manila Chronicle, specifically the period from the late 60s to 1972. So I would like to introduce you to Stephanie. Stephanie is known for her investigative research-based practice encompassing photography, sculpture, and installation, progressing from handmade and craft-inspired mediums to digital editing and archive excavations. Her work employs open source systems, shareware logic, and capital flows to scrutinize issues related to economies and empire. Initially exploring image-based processes and their implications in constructing racialized exclusionary narratives of American history and citizenship, she has shifted her focus to the history building and myth-making undertaken by Filipinos in their newfound independence. From critiquing images of American colonial anthropology in the Philippines to investigating historical museum collections and shuttered newspaper archives, her projects attempt to reframe and talk back to the archive. Her work has been exhibited widely, including at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the Whitney Museum of American Art, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, the Smithsonian American Art Museum, the Getty Museum, the Walker Art Center, and the 2015 Asian Art Biennial, among others. A longtime educator, she is an associate professor in sculpture at the University of California. We are also joined this afternoon by Isa Nazareno, who teaches Asian and Western history at Ateneo de Manila University, where she finished a degree in AD psychology. She is published author and illustrator, a member of Inc., an organization of Filipino children's book illustrators. Today, we're going to talk about archiving and its importance, and if there's anything fun we can get from archiving. First, we start with Stephanie. Talk about how you came up with this very groovy, but also very provocative show.
Is this microphone on? Fabulous. Okay. First of all, I just want to say thank you. Thank you to Silverlens Gallery for hosting this exhibition, this event. Thank you for coming on a Saturday to listen to people talk about art and support art. It's amazing. So before I dive in, I just wanted to acknowledge all the support that's been given to me to make this exhibition happen. So I'm going to answer Jerome's question in a nutshell because we have 45 minutes to talk about all of this. But as was mentioned, I was invited by the Lopez Museum to begin to excavate the photo archive of the Manila Chronicle. And the Manila Chronicle was active from about 1944 to 1972. So it was about a 30-year period, or just under. And most of it has not been digitized, so you have to physically go to the archive. And originally, I thought I was going to be exploring the colonial archives in the collection. So prior to working on this body of work, I was really looking at mostly American colonial archives of the Philippines in American institutions. So at, say, the Smithsonian Museums in Washington, D.C., but when I came to the Lopez archive, I realized it was a treasure trove of much more recent imagery. And what excited me about working with this was that it was an archive of images made by Filipinos for Filipinos about Filipinos. And that's not generally what I have access to in the United States.
Stephanie, you were born here in Manila, but you left very early on. You were a kid, right? And And this period that we're seeing right now, you didn't experience it. And so what is it that interested you about it? Is it you trying to reconnect to your Filipino?
Yeah, so I on a personal note, so I turned 50 this year. Yay! That's a wonderful marker, right? It's a wonderful kind of time frame. It also is significant in the sense that 50 years ago, some significant things happened in the Philippines. And so there's this kind of timing of, you know, I was born in 1974. I left in 1977, and I was too young to personally remember what was happening in these images, or actually I wasn't quite born yet. And yet the legacy of this history is still something that I've always been told stories about, of having to kind of imagine it. And so the other beauty about this archive was it functioned for me as a learning process. I actually was able to look at primary source images taken at the time and try to absorb the literal visual effects of it. So what you're looking at in the images is everything from both political upheaval and student demonstrations, as well as this kind of flowering of cosmopolitan culture, since the Philippines was directly in conversation with the culture of the world.
You going through the pictures in the archives, were you interested in what's happening in the photographs, or just in the broad strokes of like, this is a beautiful fashion picture. This is what?
So by focusing on 1968 to 1972, the archive itself stopped, or the collection of photographs ended at martial law. The Manila Chronicle was shut down, and so there's this kind of hard ending point to the accumulation of images. And, you know, I think I was fascinated by the time period also, you know, because of my personal, my age in relationship to it. But it's also really cool. There's something interesting about looking at these very, at the time, contemporary images of Filipino design, art, culture, hair, and also thinking that, you know, these images were also reproduced at this, in newspapers in the same way where there would be the political content at the front page, and as you went through the pages of the newspaper, you would see the other things happening at exactly the same time. So to separate those two was very difficult, or to separate those categories was difficult, because that's how it actually lives in the archive.
Because you're also, as an artist, you're also supposed to create beauty and like, right?
I think the challenge as an artist is how do you take images that were originally photographed and used to be direct documents of events or history, and then represent them in such a way to activate it, not to, you know, kind of cover over what the photojournalists were originally intending to do with the images, but to kind of make it relevant and also visually intriguing. So if you'll notice with, you know, the images are a kind of black and white palette. There are pops of color because, you know, black and white photography, there were sepia tones, there were all sorts of, you know, color in it. But I photographed in the archive by layering the physical prints. So what you're seeing is not everything that you see on most of the images on this side are not photoshopped, they're not digitally manipulated, they're kind of you know, working directly, but trying to kind of amplify the energy of the images. So you'll see these like aesthetic crops, these hard cuts, and this kind of overlay of things to kind of make them dynamic.
But these are manipulated images also, right?
Yes, so we have kind of in this gallery space two related bodies of work, in the sense that everything you see in this exhibition is pulled from the Lopez archive of the Manila Chronicle, but an earlier series, and by earlier I meant this spring, so I've only been working on this work for a year, and the works on this side of the wall focus and use images of plants and flowers and kind of decorator still life items, overlaid very kind of transparently with captions of political uprisings at the time. So I was thinking a lot about how camouflage functions. If we think how, it's difficult to see political events or a kind of, what's in front of you if it's been camouflaged in some way, or if there's something kind of disturbing the vision. I chose the plants and the flowers to kind of think about how ornamentation and a kind of decorative impulse can hide what's just under the surface politically.
There's also a lot of flowers and plants in this main board here, right?
Yeah, so part of the challenge was I wound up taking about 1,000 of my own images of the thousands of images in the archive. And so when we decided to print the images here, we sort of, we ran out of space. It's kind of like, okay, we have to stop with the prints. The design of the vinyl, almost like wallpaper at the entrance, which is this massive collage of, decorator images, plants, and also embedded in there small images of student uprisings that you kind of have to look for. We were trying out a number of ways to show the massive quantity of this archive. And in the back is a video that is 66 minutes long, and it actually has 900 images that we weren't able to reproduce in another way. So if you decide to sit through that slideshow, you will get more of an arc of what's in the archive.
Of all the photographs you've seen, and you've seen a lot, what were the most curious details do you remember? Stood out?
I think the question was what stood out to me in the archives, and I would say that after having spent 5 years mostly looking at colonial era American archives of the Philippines, that's a very particular time of imagery, a particular type of imagery. And I was getting tired of it. There's a lot, it's awful in many cases, or it's very specific as to who's taking the photograph, who's being positioned, what captioning is usually like in some of those images. And so what struck me about looking at this body of an archive from the 1960s and 70s was how contemporary it was, how, culturally relevant and and amazing. And so I think I am not going to do more about the colonial archive because
Stay in the 70s.
Well, or just it rounded out my interest, right? So because of the way that the American institutional archive works, they're really mostly focused on a very specific time period of American involvement in the Philippines. And so this was such a refreshing thing. Of course, there's a lot of anxiety wrapped up in these images. There's a lot of conflict, as well as the beauty and the excitement of culture. But I think those multiple things are entwined.
I think one of the things that stood out for me in the pictures is the rattan shields that the policemen used. I don't even remember seeing that in pictures before or noticed before. Apparently, it's not just the Philippines who use it. I was just looking at was Googling it today, and it's even Singapore was using rattan wicker shields in the 50s and 60s. So, but I don't know what the purpose of it is.
I think that's a lot of people point those out, which is amazing, right? So I've been joking that it's authoritarian craft. Because it seeps into everything, and so the construction of these basket shields, which literally look like they were modified from basket tops to now police anti-riot shields. It's a very immediate type of slippage.
Stephanie, you started with sculpture. What drew you to shift to archiving?
So I think for those of us interested in history and looking at it or re-looking at it, in 2019, I was invited by a curator in St. Louis, Missouri, to create a new project, and it turns out that the St. Louis World's Fair was also home to the a Filipino village that was set up to be put on display during American occupation. And so I went into those archives and utilized that material, and it was really my first time, so that was about 5 years ago. Subsequently, I applied for a Smithsonian Artist Research Fellowship in DC to specifically look at the National Museum of American History's holdings of the Philippines. And that just kind of went through this wonderful, I guess, rabbit hole. And in the end, I think, yeah, even though my background's in sculpture, I think there's a little bit of, reference to an installation format. But the power of the photo archive and documents in archive, I think, is rich enough for me to want to kind of bring forward in a pictorial way.
Si Isa naman, she works with the Lopez Museum and Library. Is there an archiving part of your work there? Can you talk about it?
Okay, so because people might also be thinking, what's this psych undergrad doing?
But you're a historian, you're teaching.
So I'm with the history department of Ateneo, and I'm also a consultant with Lopez Museum and Library, and helping them with the library, but also with the public programs. So your question is in terms of...
Like, what is the archiving part of your work for that?
I think, well, I'm not an archivist, I'm not a librarian, but the work that we've been doing has really been focused, I think, on thinking of ways of how to make the material in the library and the archives more accessible and more something that people won't be intimidated if they think of getting into it. How do they approach it? That's why actually I love the title of this conversation, The Unruly Archive, because it's very different from, you go into a library, there's a shelf of books that you can just pick out what interests you. But in an archive, it's very specialized materials that they're usually very rare, one of a kind, and you might not know what's there until you actually get into a rabbit hole looking at works. And I think the task, the work is, how do we get people interested in archives? Because there might be this impression that it tends to be, they're relics of the past. They're not active. They're not relevant to us today. So it's the challenge of how do you make it relevant? How do you keep it alive? Because for me especially, before I worked with Lopez, I was also working with the Rizal Library in Ateneo has I think such a good women's archive. From what I know, it's the only dedicated women's archive in the country. And not a lot of people also know that it's there, along with so many other special collections all over. So how do you get people interested in these things? Because for me, the reason for creating an archive is you want to collect it so that it can be used, it can be meaningful, not just to you now, but to other people down the line, across generations, that they can get something from it, reinterpret it like what Stephanie did in her own way. So I think it's that.
Did you meet in the Lopez Museum and Library?
How did we? Okay, so because this is one of the questions, how did she get to Lopez Museum? This is actually just the, I guess, fourth, we've been meeting in person. She first came to the Lopez Museum last year, around June, July. And she was there for a few weeks it was her first time going to the library and the archive, and she eventually focused on the photos. And I think what was revealed to her it's like a wall of filing cabinets, and it's just all photos in envelopes with these random labels. And I think even the labels are interesting because it speaks of a particular time and a particular way of ordering the world, defining the world based on those labels, what people thought were important categories at that time. But once she was looking into that, and of course, many of you might know there's no physical space for the Lopez Museum right now because it's still under construction. So we hope it's going to be open sooner rather than later. So we've been having all of these public programs. We've been trying to be more present on social media. So when Stephanie came over, we said, great, we have more material for social media. This artist doing research in the archive. Let's get some photos of that. But it was also, I guess, synergistic in a way because her interest in the photographs also made us also more interested in the photographs because there's just so much material. Sometimes, the part of the unruliness of it is, where do you start?
Yeah.
You might have a specific topic in mind, and when you go there, they don't have something that fits that specifically, but you might find something adjacent to it, related to it, or something just calls out to you more strongly. So maybe that's also what happened to you when you were looking at the material.
Yeah.
You were talking about how how do we make these remnants of the past relevant, not just for us, but for a bigger audience. So how? I think it, because I teach history also. Apart from efforts like Stephanie's doing this shows like this.
Okay, so usually when you hear archives, I don't know what your impression of archives are.
Dusty.
Well, yes. If you have allergies and asthma, it might not be the best environment. Okay, so good to wear a mask also because it's a lot of old stuff that can help. But it's, I think. Just like teaching, because both of us are academics also, whatever the subject matter, you may be geeking out on it. You may find it so fascinating and just can talk endlessly about this obscure topic, but all the other people are just, their eyes are glazing over already, right? So it's how do you sort of get out of that zone and try to think about other ways that it can be approached so that people from different cultural contexts, different generations also, might be able to access it not just physically, but sort of have some grasp or apprehend an aspect of that particular, I guess, it's like, because we have photos, snapshot of history, whether it has to do with politics or cultural expression or how they did things at that particular time. So it's trying to put yourself in their shoes, trying to come from their, I think it also helps if you work with people who are younger than you, who might have
a different interest.
Know the pulse, diba? Of the younger generation. So, a lot of...
What I'm also getting from what you're saying is that the archiving, it's not just the keeping, but also the using of it. And that's what keeps it alive, right?
Definitely, because for me, you know, there's collecting, but for me, in terms of the archive, but what for? I think that's the more important question. If it's for your own enjoyment, that's also a legitimate reason. But if, I think, because I was actually surprised. I thought Stephanie would just use some material from the Lopez Museum and Library Archive. But I was so surprised. Of course, happy that it's entirely from, the photos are all from the archive. And I think it gives us a sense also of how deep it is. Just the images alone, because this isn't even all of it, right?
Yeah.
So she was just pulling out random envelopes at the beginning. And I think what she came in with, she mentioned earlier that she had certain ideas about what she might work with, but when she got there, it was that pivot and that openness to, I guess, what materials spoke to her, and allowing that to sort of shape the outcome of the exhibit. So yeah.
Let's going back to the time of this that is being captured. It's captured in the show. Are you making a political statement with this show?
I don't know. What do you think? What do you think? So I think depending on the time of history that you're kind of covering, it can be difficult to escape the implications of what these images are saying. So yeah, I mean, on one hand, you can say, okay, yes, this could be a political statement from an artist. On the other hand, you could say that it's also a reflection of what she saw. So is that, and I get that we can kind of create, we can make decisions, or we can edit, or we can, cut things out. But when you're thinking about what newspapers were covering and what was on the front page, it would actually be more of an editing process if I left out some of these images. So in a way, I'm not saying I'm neutral, but if I was to adequately reflect the images that the photojournalists were taking at the time and what the newspaper was publishing as a free press, that this is what you would see. And just to also add to what Isa was saying regarding the quantity of this archive. So, imagine a room of shelves and shelves, floor to ceiling, with filing cabinets, each one full of physical printed photographs in envelopes that have not been opened since either the time the work was shot or it was printed. And in many cases, a lot of these images were actually never published. So a photojournalist would take way more images than what would actually be needed, and then those were filed away as well. So there's this kind of treasure trove of history sitting there, and I think I could actually be kind of naive about it in the sense that, so having not grown up here, having not seen firsthand these stories, I saw it as a teaching tool for myself. I learned about these things through witnessing the images firsthand. And having to piece together, literally, piece together from fragments of all the images you see, what I missed that happened in the Philippines.
Isa, you were there when she was doing research in the library?
Yes, sporadically. So we would encounter each other because I would be working with the team, Lopez, to try to figure out, okay, what will we do for our public programs? And Stephanie was there doing research, saying, oh, I found this, and this, and this. And just listening to you, I remembered when we were here last Tuesday when this was being set up, and I don't know if we were the ones talking to each other, and we were saying that you encountering the archive at that point for the first time, there's sort of the fresh encounter, because you didn't know what you were gonna find when you opened an envelope. It was like a surprise each time. Oh, what would this have inside? So, and then we were wondering, if you come back and look into the archive again, because you have gained a sort of education on it already from doing this as an exercise, I was wondering, so what would the subsequent output now be? Now that it's now a different lens with which you're looking at the archive.
No. I mean, that's a good question, because just to go back to on how things are organized and what it was like to pull things. So imagine a time before databases and digital image scanning. You have thousands and thousands of physical photos. They were organized by subject. So not by photographer, not by date, not by even specific event sometimes. So yeah, so a folder would just be labeled hair. So all the hair was in there. Hair, fancy hair, haircuts, yeah, just all the hair. I mean, it was amazing. There was also explosions. So those included bombings, galaxies exploding in outer space. No, it was amazing. And so there's this fascinating way in which the system itself creates an interesting metaphor. And then there's also subject archives of people. So I found relatives in the archives, which was amazing. So if a photo of you had ever been published in the Manila Chronicle, you are in the archive too. I think probably a lot of people's relatives here. And so I think that was, also it was a beautiful kind of poeticness about that openness of what constitutes an explosion.
I think also, because this is such a photograph-driven show, we must credit, I think, the photographers who took these pictures during the 70s, or during the late 60s and the 70s. I think I was wondering if Isa Nazareno could talk briefly about those.
We put together this show called Co Enriquez, Gabor, Santiago, and Rillo. And these were the five of the Manila Chronicle photographers. And it's their work that Stephanie has pulled, most of them, for this show. So these five, in 2007, 4 of them are still alive. Today, they're all passed. So there's Mario Co, Silverio Enriquez, Joe Gabor, Ed Santiago, and Ron Vito. So I just urge you to look at this, because alongside their photojournalism, they were doing funky things for themselves, including posing nude. Themselves, and taking pictures of themselves. So I urge you, we're just going to leave this book out front so you guys can look. So I think it was very, very, Stephanie very much wanted to credit the owners of these photographs, even if the Manila Chronicle did not. Because there is no single photograph that has the name of its maker. But they're here. So.
Thank you, Isa. I was talking to your mom. By the way, Stephanie's mom is in the audience. And we were talking about the importance of captioning, like identifying each of these photographs. There's no identifying. There's no ID for any of them. We're talking about, like, because it's a gallery, we are free to just do not identify works, but as opposed to a museum where we have to. Why did you not feel the need to have name any of the pictures?
Actually, so I titled the images with my own titles, but that was a way to also try to add a little bit of rationale for why the images included. The captions for the original images, though, in many cases there were none. And so that was also fascinating, of like how to kind of piece together like what it was or who it was. When they would publish a photo, though, and you can kind of see it in some of the images here, they would stamp the image with the date of its publication and cut and paste the caption that was printed in the newspaper. They would cut it out and paste it to the back of the photo. Sometimes you'd see scribbles, of like quick notations that I think the photo editor or the photographer was making. But hands down, it was very difficult to find attributions for the photographers. But instead of seeing that maybe as a loss, I was seeing it as a way in which collectively the photojournalists of the Manila Chronicle were together making the visual history of that newspaper. So apart from, say, artistic individuality, it was like, no, it's our job to create the vision of this country.
Okay. maybe we can open the two questions, open the fourth question. Are there any questions you would like to ask our panelists?
It's a book.
Which?
Oh, a book. Oh.
Sorry, there's a book. Yeah, so there's this thing here. So I guess I could talk a little bit about this. Yeah, so just to let folks know, earlier this year I had the pleasure of having my first monograph printed. And so Radius Books, which, yeah, I'm so proud to have. So, yeah, it's called The Unruly Archive, and hence the name of this talk, but it's really based on the research I did at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. So you'll notice, if you were to flip through it, you'll notice that it actually is more about the colonial archive. But I think it's a really nice kind of bookend to where I am now. So if this is where I started, and the kind of messiness that's in this book, it really does reflect the excavation process of what it's like to be an artist working in archives. I also commissioned 9 artists also working with archives to contribute short essays about their work. So it's a kind of expansion and conversation with myself and other artists whose work I respect. I just have to also think that, to get your first monograph I've been working for 30 years as a professional artist, and also at the age of 50 to get my first monograph. It was literally because there was an angel funder in California who realized that there was a lack of books published on the works of Asian American artists, and so she set out to fully fund 4 monographs of living Asian American artists. And so I just want to thank that initiative. Otherwise, something like this, maybe I'd have to wait another 30 years. I don't know. So, but this book is available to browse and also for sale.
Does anyone have any questions to ask? Yes. Oh, Boots. Please.
This is for both Isa and Stephanie.
You answer
Are
first.
there any ethical concerns that you use during the process, both for the Lopez Museum and maybe for the Lopez Museum guidelines that you have established on how the Lopez Museum collection could be accessed, and Stephanie use a part of it?
Yeah, that's a good question. Do you want to start maybe with how that was framed on your end?
So maybe to also put context into it, because I think Stephanie was also a special case, because you don't usually just walk into an archive and say, I want to see all your stuff, and be given free rein to just muck through it, dig through it, diba? So I also want to acknowledge Yael Buencamino, because she also, yes, so we all work together also, and she was one of the people who was also instrumental in inviting Stephanie to look at the material in Lopez Museum after seeing an exhibit of hers back in San Francisco. And so seeing the potential that was there based on the trajectory of the creative work she's been doing, so that sort of catalyzed this idea that, hey, maybe it would be a good collaboration to also have this artist take a look at what we have and try to find new life, reinterpret it, and show it to a new audience. So she came over, and it was very quick, I think, for the material that was there. But I think she did such a good job gathering stuff, and then we now see it here. But in terms of how to access it, so the museum is closed. We're working on that, but the library is open to researchers. Thank you, Boots, for asking that question. The library is open to researchers. You can just, the website, lml.org.ph, you can just go there. There's an email or phone number you can call. You just need to make an appointment if you want to do research. And you can tell the staff what topic you're interested in. And they'd get back to you with an email saying, yes, we're available, open on these dates or times, and you can come over. So it is open to researchers. And The staff, I think, is very helpful in terms of providing you with material, not just material you thought of going into it, but also recommending, I think, material you might want to look at that you didn't think of, but it's there also. So, there.
Yeah. Oh, wait, not yet. No, I want to pick up, just because, Boots raised a really good question, which is the ethics of reproduction, right? So, and on my end, as an artist, I've had experience before. When working with the American Colonial Archive, there are a lot of very harmful images that I decide not to reproduce, even as critical artworks, even as whatever. There's certain sort of like problematic images that already exist in the imagination that we don't need more of. But it's different. So what's different, though, about this news archive, I was seeing images that I think had never been published before, and some of them of, political events, of uprisings. And I had to choose also. There are people sometimes that could be recognizable. There are people, there's an ethics of politics isn't exactly very far removed from where we're sitting right now. So I think that I had to rely a lot also on conversations with the curators about, well, what is too much? Where do we, for the sake of, a kind of ethics of image reproduction, hold back but suggest enough so that you understand that there's a kind of vastness of possibility in the images. And so I'm very careful about that because, the history is not quite history, really. And there are people, maybe there's things to still protect.
Yeah. Angel?
No, sorry, that's the question.
Mr. Johnson.
I'm really curious. I'm curious that in sleuthing the photographs, there are two photographs that have kind of you hide things. So there's, for example, the photograph where only Imelda's bouffant hairdo shows up, and then there's a photograph which shows parts of Marcos's mouth. And then there's a full frontal photograph of Manila Chronicle. Tell me how did that happen?
Okay, so I was thinking a lot about images I've seen before and images that I'm used to seeing. And I think, images of, say, Imelda or Ferdinand Marcos in the late 60s and early 70s, those have been so much in circulation. It's a challenge. How do you present images that everyone can kind of already recognize? And so I used tactics of layering, kind of cropping, just so that you had to maybe think a little twice about what you were seeing and wonder why they were being positioned in a different way. The Ninoy Aquino images, though, I was less familiar with. And so to look at them, to give them the space, to kind of linger on them and have them exist together was something that I was excited to see. So, maybe call it naivete or maybe call it, a kind of decision-making. It deserved its space there next to an image, a NASA image of a galaxy exploding with a caption saying that sometimes events millions of years later can ripple outwards and still have effects afterwards.
Not just because you don't want to show their faces.
Who knows?
Do we have any more questions?
Oh my God. Okay, so I have a gift. Yeah, so okay, thank you. I have a gift for everybody. This work is about a newspaper and images that at one point circulated freely and were distributed widely. So as part of this exhibition of formal photographs, there's a work that is meant to be free, and everybody should take a copy of, there's a stack of posters over on that pedestal, and it is a reproduction of the last printed issue of the Manila Chronicle from September 23, 1972. It turns out it was printed, but the memory of it is that it was never distributed. So it's a phantom print. It's a phantom edition of news that, quote unquote, never happened because of the declaration of martial law. It's hard to read the image, though, because it's been highly modified using halftone pixelation. And so halftone is also the method in which newspaper photographs were reproduced easily. And the trick about that poster, too, is if you hold it up and you look at it from very far away, you can actually read more of it. So it's difficult to read close up, but with distance and maybe hindsight, you can actually read more. So please, take one. Take one. It's for distribution. It's meant to flow through the world and live on your walls and in your homes. And then lastly, I think I would just want to say thank you to the Lopez curatorial team and conservation staff for also contributing. In the back, with the gallery and the video in the back gallery, there's a display of tools and artifacts that are used in the conservation process. And I was thinking a lot about how history and all the objects associated with an archive, they constantly need care, or else they fall into disrepair or they degrade. And so those tools of care are back there for you to look at as evidence of how people are still stewarding and shepherding history today. So thank you.
I think that's a good breakdown, because I was going to ask you about that. You were talking about it in last Tuesday, how the importance of archiving, because we need to preserve of the past and we need to guard it. We need to conserve it.
Disappearance.
Yes. So that it stays alive. Yeah. Do you want to elaborate more?
That's it. I think it's really
But thank you very much for joining us. That's our discussion.
Thank you.